Okay, here we are. We're live now. It's almost 2 o'clock Asian time and 4:30 Darwin time, where my university is. So welcome everyone, especially those who actually joined us a bit early. We will wait a second until it hits 2 o'clock, just in case people come on time and they will miss welcome. So today we talk conferences. It's the time of the year when we have conferences, and I felt that just giving a keynote or just giving a paper may not be enough. I felt like I wanted to talk more. Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Welcome everybody who is joining us right now, just on time. So today we talk conferences. I felt after I spoke at two conferences, I felt I wanted to have a Q&A, but unfortunately, I don't know, there's a habit somewhere that these sessions, the Q&As are cut out. I think it's sad. It's very interesting when you go to the US. And you listen to keynotes, and well before the keynote even ends, you've got these 2 rows of people queuing up for Q&As. You've got microphones set up. People already are queuing up and fighting for the first spot to ask a question. Whereas when we have conferences, for some reason, organizers just cut it out. It's the best part of the conference. So here we are today. This is the home team time today. We're not having a guest. For those people who are now showing up on our chat, thank you for being here. Just a reminder that next week we also have another session next week, and this will be again about intellectual framing. We are inviting Professor of Philosophy, Professor Wayne Cristaudo, a colleague of mine and a very good friend, and my library. He's got a head with the references and library and understandings, and that will be really interesting. Unless you have intellectual framing, you have nothing. All you have is intuition, guesses, pretty much reflexes, right? And often reflexes are not the demonstration that we actually have some expertise. Children have reflexes, adults have reflexes and thinking. So the home team here, Professor Andrew Lyon, and also my colleague Lala Sudimantera from Cirebon in Indonesia. So anything, guys, you want to say yourselves that is sitting on your heart now about conferences? I would just also ask our audience if you want to say something about conferences, or something you would like to see in conferences, or something you just want to share with us. Please type in chat, and we're reading it, and we will refer to it. So this way we're giving you voice, and we're not leading this little chat today. So before I actually assert my own role as a chair and talk about things I want to talk about, first maybe I'll just ask my home team. Lala,
Yes.
if you don't mind sharing with us anything that's sitting on your heart regarding your presentation at the workshop. It was your first workshop
Yeah.
at AsiaCALL. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for assisting our doctoral students in gaining skills in technology, and also understanding better why technology in languages. So is there any specific little issue that you can focus on,
Yep.
and we
Yep.
could actually talk about whether it was something important for you, whether you said something or whether you perceived something?
Okay. So thank you for having me in again, and yeah, and Andrew. I think uh, the workshop talk that I gave at Azure Call this year was my biggest moment. I think that's the proudest moment for me too, because I had to make more preparation. I mean, I need to make bigger preparation. So the very specific thing that I shared with the audience is how I actually utilize the three learning tools that you developed in Australia and in Thailand in relation to learning of academic writing of English. So I told them that this project made me very nervous. At the same time, I did not know exactly how to utilize the three learning tools at the same time for this teaching learning project in Indonesia. But I told them that I was successful because I positioned myself as a learner. So I sat with my student as a learner, not as a traditional teacher. So when we did verbotenal exercises in class, I also did dance with my students. Whenever we read the abstract for analysis, we also read together. So I have to stand up, I have to dance, I have to move a lot in the research room. And then I think that's how I actually did the learning process more with my students. But there are also some technical, let's say, technical preparations that I make. Verboten approach. I mean, the verboten exercises was introduced, I think, a week before we joined the first class, and I think it was actually a proud moment for me when my students did actually do the verboten exercises from the first week to the 15th week without any
Can I
stop.
interrupt you?
Yeah,
When I
sure.
was running the and with Andrew, actually, we were doing the project in Cambodia
Yeah.
with pre-service teachers, and we also integrated Andrew's exercises for pronunciation, which
Mm,
obviously, as Andrew has spoken about and may also mention again,
yeah.
pronunciation is not just pronunciation. It
Right.
is also grammar. It is also better writing.
Yeah.
People don't see these relationships. That's because we see everything in isolation. Thank God that our brain doesn't work this way because
Mm,
we wouldn't be able to see. Well, it actually does work this way when you grow older. I'm here now in Poland with my mother, and it's extremely interesting. My mother has two daughters now, both called Anya. One lives
mm.
in Australia, and one is now with her in Poland. You can see it's almost like a demented brain, which now associates identity with an event.
Mm, mm.
So when she went to Poland, when she's in Poland with me, that's me. And then there's the other girl,
Ah,
also named Anya, also her daughter, but she lives in Australia and she went to visit her. So this kind of almost, I don't know, it's demented way of looking
mm,
at the
mm.
world when we don't connect. And you can see when the brain doesn't connect, talks nonsense.
Yep.
And my mother now talks nonsense in that way. So, but so pronunciation is important. Andrew's exercises have proven over and over again for 40
Mm,
years that they are fantastic.
yeah.
But what we noticed with our Cambodian English teachers when we were teaching them those, that they were losing interest. And I think
Mm.
because they are exercises you have to do. It's not
Oh,
going to
great.
happen to you. And it's also not reasoning. It's not something you're going to work it out. You actually have to
Mm,
go through the motion. And I think that what was missing in our Cambodian project was someone like you who would be on site and do
mm.
it with the students.
Right. Right.
Andrew may have different experiences from his research, but in case of Cambodia and maybe also Indonesia, I
Yeah.
think having someone doing the exercises with the students, at least, well, it motivates them. So
Yep.
it is
Yep.
technology, as you were saying. You were doing workshop in technology, but you noticed also intuitively as you were integrating Andrew's tools, pronunciation tools, that the in-person component was also important. So I
Yep.
think that
Yep.
if we use like I had also in my Cambodian project, I had extracurricular exercises online and wonderful, interesting, fun online English games that I collected all over Australia from different sites. And people
Yep.
were not using them either. I think they
Mm,
wanted me to show it to them how it works. Now, in terms of lifelong learning skills, which is what we want to teach our students, right? I would have expected that the students in Cambodia, especially because they were pre-service teachers, they were learning
mm,
to be they would have been straight after our project. They would have gone to schools, secondary
okay.
schools. So I would have expected them to actually engage on their own,
Mm,
right? So,
right.
but they expected mommy.
Mm,
They somehow they didn't have this inner motivation to go on site on the website and just check themselves. They just needed someone, and I don't know whether it's throughout the globe or it is particular to say maybe your students. Definitely that happened in Cambodia, right?
yep.
You need someone to hold you,
Right. Right.
which is different in Australia. I think in Australia people really, maybe not all of them, but people do go and click and check.
Yep.
So you were doing this, Lala, with students. So that's that sort of face-to-face component of technology-based learning.
All right. So I was doing one single exercise, not exercise, one single sentence in class, like for half an hour every single week. So I think it was fun to learn verbatim exercise every single week, and they could do the rest of the exercises outside the class. So I think that's pretty easy for my students. I know that the internet penetration here in my country is very low. I think that's the only challenge back then.
It's a problem, right? It's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think so. Okay, so we spoke about that. Andrew, would you like to share some specific aspect that is sitting and bugging you, sitting on your mind, bugging you? You feel you didn't say it. You feel maybe you didn't discuss it during your keynotes. You feel someone else said something and you want to touch upon it.
Um,
Andrew, do you hear us? We can't hear you.
we cannot hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
So, well, as president of AsiaCALL, I gave a keynote, and it's called the presidential keynote, and I try to raise big issues because my experience, uh, both of the use of technology in language learning and also of the developments in language learning methodology in general, is that people are tending to focus on what I call little projects.
Mm,
And by little projects, I mean that they are doing small, very small scale research, right? I don't mean that they are not very interesting, but that they are very small scale research. Um, as a parody, I would say, well, working on the position of prepositions in sentences, are they in the right place or something like that? And I think that these are fine, and are useful or can be useful, but at the same time there is a lack of understanding that all learning in schools and everywhere else happens within the context of a much bigger framework. The bigger framework might be communicative language teaching. It might be, if you want to call it SLA as such. It might be it might be everywhere, but people are not talking much about the big picture. And I think that the big picture needs some help to emerge. Um, I was also president of another conference which ended today called ICTE, or International Conference on TESOL and Education,
mm,
and I raised that point, and um, in my keynote there, I spoke about um, a topic called something like um,
Two frameworks that people don't know
two,
about.
two language learning frameworks that you probably didn't know existed.
mm,
And I did that because on YouTube there's a lot of videos like that about software, 10
yeah,
computer websites you probably never heard of. And I thought I could do it that way so as to raise a little bit of interest, because keynotes are typically very, you know, especially presidential keynotes which talk about policy and direction, tend to be a little bit boring. So I thought I'd better give it an interesting title. Um, Most people, as expected, had never heard of the two or three things that I talked about. I had talked about three things in the same spirit at the CMEO RETRAC conference in Vietnam a couple of weeks ago. And the three things that I talked about there were rhizomatic systems, verbotonalism, and personal, um, not personal, uh,
precision.
precision language
Precision.
education. Precision language education. I think we need to start thinking in terms of big frameworks rather than worrying about the positions of
Yeah,
adjectives and adverbs and stuff like that. So that was for the ICTE conference. But the problem is the same in the Asia Call area. In Asia Call, I talked about the topic of it was called something like looking forward, looking back, and and basically trying to set a direction for computer assisted language learning. And there are a couple of things that I tried to say. The first one is that, again, because we're just dealing with small projects, we are not investigating fully the range of possibilities of call, and we have grown comfortable with a number of approaches, a number of techniques that we use in our classrooms to use technology, and outside the classroom, because I mean technology can take us out of the classroom very easily and very effectively. And so I talked a little bit about that, and I also talked about the fact that when the microprocessor was invented or became widely used in the kind of late 70s, early 80s of last century, uh, people were very, very excited. There was a huge, there was a huge kind of backlog of stuff that people had wanted to do and never did, and they were ready to undertake big projects. And the prototypical example that I gave was that of um, a program called Montevidisco that had attracted a lot of attention. It used video disc as the basis of its work, and it was a kind of conversation practice system based on a hypothetical trip to Latin America. And this was a very big project put together by Larry Gale at Brigham Young University. It appeared in the first issue of the first journal on computers and language learning called Calico, It appeared in 1983. And what was interesting about that is that it died. I mean, it
Because
immediately died.
is it because of the change of technology, or is it because nobody could really didn't know, nobody knew what to do with it?
It wasn't because of the change of technology, because the change in technology happened more
10
slowly
years
over
later, yeah.
maybe 10 years later. And they could have done something with it. They claim to have had hundreds of people interested in it, but nobody actually did it. Nobody actually took the risk and put it together. And
So was it like at that à la rencontre de Philippe? Is it part of it?
À
That
la
was for
rencontre
French?
de Philippe was a different system created on a Macintosh system through MIT. Larry Gale was at Brigham Young, and À la rencontre de Philippe was about 10 years later, or something like that.
Okay, so what was with that video disc that you spoke first about?
Montevideo.
What was in it that was interesting and should have been integrated?
Well, it would not necessarily integrate, but it was a conversation practice system. So it was a system which in 1983, with the limitations of the technology then, enabled you to watch somebody talk at you, somebody said something, and then you responded something. The something was recorded and was available later for review by a teacher, by a human, and then on the basis of what you responded, and it wasn't on the basis of what, there was no automatic speech recognition or anything like that. You only had 4 or 5 sentences that you could select. You responded one of those sentences, you clicked on the button, and then it took you to the next phase of that same conversation. And I think there were 28 possible dialogues for, and it was created with, well, it was a bit sexist at the time. But anyway, there was a section for males and a section for females. The section for males dealt with things like bullfights, and the section for females dealt with more delicate things. I don't remember what. But the reason I mentioned Montevideo is because it came out in the first ever Calico Journal issue. The Calico Journal that year issued so the Calico Journal issued 5 issues that year. Five.
Oh,
There was enough stuff waiting to publish 5, multi-page issues in 1983. And then in my own work in 1984, maybe 1985, I had already started working on a database for languages, which would enable people to create situations. I had already worked on things like listening comprehension markup systems and so on. And there were other people who were working on similar things. Jim Pusak and Sue Otto at the University of Iowa. Ruth, her name escapes me for the moment, from the University of Florida, was working on a thing called Spion, which was a German adventure
Spy thing.
software. Yes, the spy about being a spy, and then some help with the German. Now, all of these things happened, and they were all done by creative people, and they all died. Now, they all died for many reasons. One of the reasons was later that the technology changed so rapidly that it killed the software. In other words, adapting, just the process of adapting software to new technology was a hugely time-consuming thing, and would kill the project, however good it was. So that was one thing, and the technology was not always. The technology change was not always a good thing, because with video disc, although the technology was analog technology, we were able to get frame accurate. We were able to take a movie and break it down into frame by frame, which was 1/24th of a second or 1/30th of a second resolution, very accurate. We could go to this point in the word or that point in the word.
Right. So if you wanted to re-listen to a particular small
Chunk.
element,
Yeah,
a
like a
chunk
chunk.
is even larger, but small chunk, you could
Yes.
precisely identify it. Whereas later on, with digital technology, somehow you.
Well, the digital technology that came up was not quite as accurate as that. It's not that it wasn't accurate, it was also that the software for controlling it was not there. In the video disc that we were using, all you had to do was send the video disc 3 characters, and it found exactly the spot where and 3 characters from a very old-fashioned terminal, right? Not today's sophisticated laptops and so on. It's just a very old-fashioned terminal, and it found the spot on the video disc, which enabled you to do very detailed listening comprehension exercises, for example, which is what I was using it for. Or maybe you could set up a simulation, or maybe you could use it as a multimedia dictionary. You could do
So
all of these things very, very
what you're
simply.
saying is that, say, 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, the situation in coal was such that we had maybe people like Jack Burston, for example, you know, they were doing the pedestrian things, your grammar exercises, which is great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But you also had the leaders that were actually thinking ahead and doing more interesting things, more innovative. And the reason for it which is something that you touch on, but I want to expand later on, is because those leaders had a not just epistemological understanding greater, but also above ontology and the epistemology. They had intellectual framing. They understood that language is not words organized by grammar, right? And consequently, so they had the brain. So you had the people with the brain, and then you had people who were just doing the pedestrian things. Altogether, coal was rich. At this very moment, what happened, and I have my own suspicion why. Um, okay, I would just talk how I say it. Linguistics has hijacked the field of language teaching because you can't do much with language, and there's lots of linguists out there. So basically, linguists, to justify their own existence, they grabbed TESOL or fields of language teaching and literacy and reduced communication and
Mm,
language teaching to applying language rules.
right.
And then we
Well,
have the situation, just wait a sec. Then we have a situation like I want to talk here about, and I'll just only grab here just half a minute, where governments came up with this full citizen and participation and learning needs of the students coming out of the community. So then the question was not what these terms mean in terms of the broader ontology and what can we do with those understandings in terms of epistemology, which means evidence that we can actually identify. That wasn't the question. The question was how to reduce the full citizen to the applicants of the rules of language, right? And then if you can put a sentence together that is grammatically relatively close, then here you go. You can be a full citizen. We basically degraded the goals of educators that were embedded in policies to something that we could do. So, policies today, in my view, do not open the door for us as educators to learn. What we did, we looked at those policies and we say, oh, they're just different words for the stuff we do already. And then we scratch ourselves, why is it that proficiency is not improving, that
Yeah.
Professor Andrew Lyon says we do low level things?
Mm.
Well, I think that Lalai, in his chapter 2, where he did the literature review, was showing how narrow is the scope of evidence or of thinking of language learning, in terms of which people in Indonesia do research in language learning. And then we have another phenomenon which is happening in Southeast Asia now, crazy, just crazy, which is um, teachers and students. Students should be researchers. Well, students need mentors. Teachers
Mm.
need mentors.
Right.
There's a reason why someone is a professor, because they have experience and they have a whole um, library in the head of what's involved. So instead of locating money within centers of innovation and research, and then bringing the teachers there, bringing the students there, so they learn or collaborate together. We integrate experiences together or connect experiences and learn from one another and do things. Instead, we give, and then so such a project would get, say, for example, $100,000 or $1 million. Instead, what we do, we take the $1 million and we spread it all around Indonesia for every teacher or for every postgraduate student to do small projects. Once you do small projects and someone says to you, "Oh, you conducted research project," you feel rewarded by that, right? You feel you've done something, and for the rest of your life, you will be doing that little thing because someone said it was a good thing. It wasn't a good thing, it was a good thing for a beginner, but that was not research. So we stifle with the way we distribute money, and then with the way we define what research is. We stifle research in language teaching. We have reduced its intellectual framing to language rules. And I'm not saying there are no rules, but we need to understand what these rules mean in terms of language learning. And that takes studying to understand it.
Yeah.
When we don't study, we just replicate old,
Mm.
simple narratives.
Right.
And then we also justify it and we say, oh, well, this is for professors. We're just doing the real things on the ground.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
um, y-
Yeah, but
Andrew.
there's something else, I think, and that is the fact that this kind of ambitious computer-assisted language learning did not capture the imaginations of departments. They
Mm.
did not get wholehearted support. So,
Oh, because until COVID, there was another
yeah,
narrative running. Unless you hug your student and you have face-to-face teaching, it's, this technology stuff is not about hugging the student. Therefore, it's irrelevant. I mean, we've seen it too. We're
well,
old enough
that's
to have access
that's
with.
that's a parody of it, but it wasn't quite like that. I mean, in 1984 or 85, I said 1983 last time on the program, but I think it was a bit after that, maybe 84 or 85. We ran 2 years of listening comprehension classes on a computer at the University of Queensland, and they were pretty successful. The interesting thing is that, and I don't think I was the only one. When I left the university to go to Bond University and run the language center there in 1988, all of this died with me. I left the
Mm.
University of Queensland, which had supported me and which had happily set up a computer based language learning system. It died because I left. And when I went to the university, to Bond University, it was very difficult for me to restart the program, partly because of the change in technology, and partly because I was too busy.
mm,
Yeah, as an administrator
As
then.
as an administrator, this was my first professorship, and I went there and started to administer things, and I honestly didn't have time to deal with it. So it was really, even though the atmosphere was very, very positive at the beginning. So what I'm trying to say is that all of these initiatives were typically connected to one person, or maybe two people.
mm,
And when they moved on for professional or personal reasons, the programs died with them. No one was there to take over because no one had been convinced of their value.
yes,
I
yes,
think
Yes,
I think
there were nice, sorry, there were nice things to have. You know, there were pretty toys, and you could show people and showcase it. But really, you know, that's all they were. It wasn't the real thing. They were never mainstreamed.
mm,
I think
Yeah.
this really vindicates the point, which I might have flagged before. Rather than locate expertise in called computer assisted language learning, just in case some people don't know the acronym. So rather than locate expertise, whether it's in call or whether it's in academic writing that I specialize in, and discourse analysis and so on, rather than locate it in a university where it ends up to be with just one person or two, as you said, I think we should locate expertise in associations. I think associations need to be more, or at least
okay,
AsiaCALL Association, in my view, should become more than just a conference organizer and maybe also publisher of journals. I think that what we should do now is to integrate the expertise we have, the different generations that we have now within what we call the AsiaCALL family, and create really professional development courses and issue association certificates, so people will participate in our professional development, whether individually or through the university institutions, and in this way we don't depend on a single person within the university, on the vice chancellor, but we basically we integrate expertise, say from Thailand, from Australia, from Indonesia, from Vietnam. We integrate the expertise and um, spread it around, and look after the people then later on that will complete those courses. I think it's a better model.
mm,
Well, it may be. It may well be a better model, and I think we need to investigate that. So you can spread the expertise not only, as you said, in the university system where they are linked to one person, but everybody, in a sense, everybody becomes part of that system. There's also possibilities for under postgraduate degrees or diplomas or something like that, which universities might want to think about. But so when you take all of these things together, the connection with only one person, the lack of mainstreaming by departments who think that it's a nice toy, but it's not the real thing, you know, and and the changing technology, all three of these things make a big difference and make it disappear. The The situation, I think, these days is getting more settled and more reliable because, at least for the moment, internet technology and internet languages are fairly stable and enable people um, to plan for something like in the midterm, and then you can start thinking about adapting the new internet that will emerge with
Mm.
time. So you can start doing certain things now. I mean, one of the things that Anya and I have been talking about for countless years is a multimodal database or a multimedia database, which
Yeah.
would have a lot of information in it with a good search engine. The search engine would search on a particular taxonomy, which might have 70 or 80 items in it, and include things like gesture and intonation and so on.
Mm.
And so that would give sorry, put a pitchy nose for some reason. That would give um, a kind of general purpose facility for people around the world to use. Right? You wouldn't need necessarily to make it multi-country or multinational or whatever it is, but you could still have a big database like that, and and the core of that might be a movie or something similar. Um, and the technology is improving for that, and the ability to section a whole movie from point A to point B is improving rapidly. I now have access to a very cheap system made in Romania, of all
Mm.
places, which has good facilities for that. It's primitive in some ways, but it's also better developed in some other places. So all we have to do is build a database over it, although that's a bit problematic at the moment. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that there is a way forward,
Okay.
and there is the possibility of, if we can get a few people or maybe a couple of universities involved in creating such a database, which is not technically difficult these days. It was more technically difficult when I started trying to do this, but nowadays it's much simpler. So if we unite and work together, it will help. And the other thing, as Anya pointed out, and as I pointed out, is that all of the work I was talking about was pre-COVID. Now, post-COVID, I think everybody has worked out that it's possible to use technology, that the technology is okay, that the results are
Yep.
okay, and that we can go forward calmly and happily in a technological direction, using a combination of online and offline, or by offline I mean asynchronous, if you like.
Mm.
So we can use synchronous and asynchronous systems to do some language learning. Um, so I think that changes things. I also wanted to say to people that um, I'm running a survey. I'm running an AsiaCALL survey on a kind of post-pandemic AsiaCALL survey. Anya, your microphone is switched off.
Can you insert the link of your survey into the chat right now?
Yes, I can. And it's called, I can insert it in this chat, but I don't know if,
Yeah.
I think the AsiaCALL chat would be better. We can put it in there later. It's GoCultures.com, GoCultures with an S, GoCultures.com/surveys.
Can you type it?
Yes, I'm doing it now. And this is going to be a very important survey for all languages, not just for English, to find out how after we've had some time to recover from the initial shock of COVID. Now that we've had some time, we can think about it a little bit more clearly and in a bit more less let's say hysterical way. So what's been going on? How can we move forward? And it would be interesting to see how many people respond. Not many so far, but I've only just launched it. And then what the reaction was, and in a sense, what the expectations of the universities was and still is. One of the interesting things that happened in my university is we ran a survey some time ago asking stakeholders what they wanted from PhD students, and rather than what I had expected, which was for the stakeholders to say things like, "Oh, what we would really like is very well trained people who understand how language learning works, so that we can do some development work and train our students to do masters and PhD degrees." What they answered, or one of the things that they answered, is they wanted people who were able to run language labs, or maybe not language labs exactly, but who were able to run technology.
Yeah, and I don't think that. Yeah, so I don't think that people create enough space in postgraduate and undergraduate, but in the postgraduate streams for students to actually gain these skills.
But that's because course-based PhDs and master degrees don't have a lot of room to move. I mean, they
Oh,
will
that's
say,
because
well,
we have all these histories of this and histories of that,
well, partly
and
because we have, yeah, partly because we have the histories of this and that. But I mean, they will say, well, what would you rather have, SLA or computers?
computers. Because SLA now, I mean, I can't find all the articles, but there are clearly papers published where we've been saying this for 30 years, that SLA, as it has been framed,
Mm.
is the field for linguistics. It's not a field for language teaching.
That's
And
correct.
this SLA scientists themselves were saying that has nothing to
Yeah.
do with language teaching. They were
That's
basically
also
looking,
correct.
but people just run with that thing, and rather than running with, say, today with what's neuroscience saying about language learning, what could you find would be interesting? How could we work with this or whatever? We have things that bear no relationship to language teaching.
Yeah, well, certainly people like Bill Van Patten would say that second language acquisition has nothing to do with language teaching. If language teachers want to use it, then they can. The other thing I was going to add is that there is a question that I wanted to raise with everybody, and that has actually an impact on how people react to technology. Everybody wants the answer to the question, the following question, which is technology the answer to language learning? Or does technology help with language learning? And I said yesterday to Josef Kolpert, who's the editor of the Call Journal, and I would have said this morning to Willy Renandia, I would have said to him that this is actually a non-question. This is not a question that can be answered.
Mm.
It's a question that people ask, but a question that makes no sense.
It's a
Because,
draft question, what I called, ever since I've been involved in my recent field of research for the last, say, 10 years in this particular, although maybe for longer. It's a draft question. It's not that not every question is a correct question. It's just that
Mm.
sometimes when the child says to you, right, that's that's not what a 30-year-old would say. That's because that little thing got embellished, understood better, right? So it's framed better. So the same here. That's a draft question. One has to actually formulate precisely the question and needs skills for that. Not every
right,
question is a well formulated question.
right, but everybody wants to know, oh, okay. As somebody actually said to me one day, well, how many percent is it better when you teach with technology? And
Yeah. So
he was a professor from Kazakhstan who had to convince his vice chancellor or the university president to buy some computers. The question, of course, depends on what kind of technology, in what context, and how are you going to use it.
Mm.
It's not a question. It's not simply a question of, oh, technology will do it, because that means
Yep.
nothing.
So are we
Technology is
framing
not just.
ourselves in say country like Kazakhstan, right, or the country like say Southeast Asia region, like countries like the Southeast Asia region? Are we framing ourselves into victims? Because what we're saying is, well, we don't have to do the work. The reason why we can't frame the question is because we are poor. So consequently, we will never be Harvard. So consequently, let's do what we've always. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not hard to understand, at least ontologically, that what's in your head is not necessarily in someone else's head, and there is no evidence. In fact, there's evidence contrary that the whatever grammar, whether it is a descriptive grammar, it's not actually the real picture in human brain. How hard is it to understand it? And consequently, if you train people to a particular way of seeing the world, and these people are not reflecting to you that they have actually learned from you anything, it's not because they are not studying or because there's something wrong with them. It's just that your expectation that you want to train them into what you think is the legitimate way of representing the language is actually not having any basis in reality. So unless you actually ask yourself, why do I expect this to succeed? We will always have this push and pull. So the thug war, basically, which we play with dogs, right? You have expectations and they are not met. And it's not necessarily the student's fault. It's actually that we haven't reflected on the basis of why we think it should succeed.
Hmm.
And with some students, it succeeds, but only partially within the narrow limits of your testing. Then they go to the big world and all of it falls apart a month later after the test. I don't know. Look, we don't have to be in that stifled framework of thinking about language teaching or language technology. I mean, I've done primitive technology when learning French, right? Because University of Queensland didn't just have your programs, had someone else's programs, and I've done the course. I got the highest grade studying French at University of Queensland, but not under you. Some other people were teaching me, and then I had a boyfriend in France. So I've done a year of French to communicate with my French boyfriend. I picked up the phone, or he picked up the phone to call each other. And I couldn't even say, after a year of memorizing all the books, all the phrases, having done all the exercises, right? And being an excellent student, I went on the phone with my French friend. I couldn't even say, how are you? What have you been doing? And is it, has it in your place? And, like little small talk. I had no idea how to do it. But I knew till today I can say, Pierre Mireille. Mireille a oublié son, how do you say the gloves?
C'est bon. C'est
Second,
gone.
right? And then they were in the taxi and all of that. That story I can still say. But it had, but Mireille forgot her gloves in the taxi, and then Pierre was running with the taxi after her to return to her gloves. What did that have to do with my life? My life was to call my friend and say, how are you going? How's your father going? How's your sister going? Has your sister married already? Does she still like her boyfriend? I hate her boyfriend. Do you still hate her boyfriend? There, we hate her boyfriend. Is he still in France? Is he still in France? All right. Did they move? Or are they still living under the same roof? These are simple questions to ask, but they were never in the story about Pierre and Mireille.
No.
So language teaching is less mysterious, it's less difficult than we think. However, when the field is hijacked by a single discipline, when we look at the world through very narrow what do you call it? Window, very narrow lens, we find out that we can do very little. And then we blame the students or we blame whatever, and we see ourselves as victims. We ask questions like, will technology save me? Yeah, but the brain with it helps. Technology without the brain is not really helpful.
Okay. I may
So
have to leave you for a few moments.
I think the idea of professionalizing call even more, and I think the idea of Asia call playing a greater role in professionalizing the region. I think it's a good idea. I think that
Yes.
some institution may like it, some individuals may like it, some institutions may like it. I think we do that. That would be very good. What did I want to say? I think that the point that Andrew was making. Where do I? Oh, pardon me. It's not the one. It's this one I wanted to add. I think what I wanted to focus on. So in Asia Call presentation, I spoke about how students were the quality of students' responses to my survey on my questionnaire. After the project with me, I've asked them some questions, and then I spoke at Asia Call about the quality of students' responses. It's interesting because I wanted to talk about the quality of students' responses, not because that struck me, it's because that's been striking me every time I get responses to questionnaires. So, for example, when my doctoral students, as part of the mixed method study, do questionnaires, say in Indonesia, a few of my students in Cambodia, we always get the same quality of responses, which is short,
Mm.
disconnected from everything.
Yep.
Something like, I see whether the previous slide exemplifies. So, for example, what did you learn from Anya's class, right? So we were teaching them English for proficiency, but we also were utilize our understanding of pedagogy, and we were explaining to students why we were doing this, how it can be relevant to their job as future teachers. We were doing all of that. And obviously, these students in Cambodia were studying to be teachers, so they had also other classes parallel to our engagements. So they were getting education not just from me, but also from other teachers. And you get the response in the questionnaire. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about technology. This is a response that I expect from a pedestrian. I don't
Mm.
expect a response like this from a person who next year will be
Will
already
be a
on.
teacher.
Yeah, we'll go to schools.
Yep.
But you can see that these responses are so um, there's a word, notorious, and everywhere, from Indonesia everywhere. I mean, look, you can say that we were getting these responses from low level universities. No, we were sending questionnaires not only to participate, so we meaning my students, my doctoral students, and so on. I'm thinking now particularly about Hanum. Maybe you too, Lala, can't remember, but say to Hanum. Hanum was sending, and Wahid, all over Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
So Jakarta, all the metropolitan universities, and if they were lucky to actually get responses, they were
Mm.
like
Mm.
this,
Yep. Yep.
easy to translate, because it was just one sentence. And they were actually, a lot of them were in English as well, but like that. So you would say, so some of our viewers may say, well, what's wrong with that? Look, when you talk about your profession, you need to talk in professional terms.
That's right.
You need to talk, use concepts of your profession. You use the questionnaire to reflect on
Yeah.
what you actually know. It's a tool to engage yourself in the profession. It's not just to get rid of a questionnaire. So saying things like, I learned, the third line here, I have learned lessons about my career in future. Like, you don't need to tickle me. I'm fine if you said it was just Anya's teaching was just a dump, right? I'm happy with that. But even if you said that it was bad, or if you said that it was good, it's equally relevant because you said nothing, right? So there is no abstract thinking, which literally reflects to me that we're not teaching people abstract thinking. And that's shown not just through the questionnaires of my pre-service teachers in Cambodia, but also it's not demonstrate the ability to think abstractly and to use concepts, abstract concepts of the profession, and reflect on them. It's not present in any of the questionnaires I have seen in my doctoral students' work. Literally, you get like this: a line, a one line or two liners, and that's it. And it's like, what? We do not, through our courses, somehow we don't instill in people that it's not the answer that matters, but your understanding, or what concepts are there, what concepts need to be understood better. That's the scope of the problem. Your understanding of the scope of the problem is more important than your answer of how to teach. And the reason for it is that sometimes when you understand the problem, you are more delicate. Your dance in your class is more sophisticated because you know it's not hit and get the response. It's like, it's complicated. It's complicated. Let's play. Right? That attitude, you gain this attitude when you understand things are complicated. So yeah, I think that was that. And in my presentations, in Ho Chi Minh at that other conference in Vietnam, just yesterday, I think, this simple way of framing thoughts about language teaching was also reflected. So I was teaching, we were teaching for weeks on, discourse analysis, all kinds of things. We're clearly doing our best. And our students were producing work that reflected very clearly to us what they were actually saying, which is, oh, we've known it all along. And how did we know that students thought this way? Because they didn't attend the online classes. It was easy. Well, Anya was just, teaching us what we already knew. Really? So the students' work, as I indicated in my presentation, showed that those students who weren't attending, those students who thought they knew it all, and right, so they were writing like children. I don't have that presentation, and I think we don't have to go into it today, but they were writing as they were composing a story about some event, and that was their own composition. They were writing like children from primary school. And the reason they were writing like children from the primary school was because someone else taught them that to succeed in English, you have to write sentences that have words organized by grammar,
That's
right?
true.
So they were saying, I was born. So imagine you're reading someone's story about something that is important to that author. But the story goes on and on. I was born in little town. I have three sisters. Was having difficulties going to school. Right? It just went on. And it was like the entire CV. And it was just one line about why that person wrote that story somewhere sort of towards the end. It's like, that's not how you write a text. But there were sentences, I agree. The sentences were in English, I agree. The sentences used English words, I agree. Well, it wasn't a text. So just as in pre-service teachers and lecturers questionnaires, there was abstract thinking lacking in students' text. Not all of them, some of them worked well, but in most of them, the connection between um, the connection, that the understanding of what text actually is, was just not there, because abstract thinking was not there. People switch off when you learn them to analyze, when you teach them to analyze text and why and we do these things and what's the purpose of, they turn off. They already know. They just know that you're just writing their sentences, right? No. If you do that, people, if I when I read a text and it has this kind of stuff, even professional text where I'm committed, I have to understand. Like even when I was reading those stories written by Cambodian pre-service teachers, I had to read them to analyze them. I wanted to go to the kitchen and eat chocolate. I didn't want to do that. I was reading one sentence over and over and over again, not because the grammar was wrong. Forget it. Like everybody who is a non-native speaker make grammar mistakes. That's fine. Even Andrew, who is bilingual in English and French, now and then he produces French in his English. Everybody has, moments or whatever. The text was draining me, was killing me. I couldn't read it. I was so tired by it. I wanted to run away, but I had to, because I had a presentation next day. So one of the reasons why Andrew and I produce presentations the day before or a minute before the conference, one reason, not all of them, sometimes we're busy, but another one is we have to go through this pain of dealing with that data that we don't want to read, not because students can't write, it's because students don't understand what text is. A text is your attempt to take some time from someone's life. You better get it right, because people don't want to give you time of their life. So you better do it right so that people want to engage with you. Otherwise, you're just boring, you tire them, and they hate you for that. Not as a person, but for stealing their time. They have to read your text. So there's a difference between a draft and a version to produce for communication, to send to someone. And that also needs to be taught when you teach how to produce text, right? There's a place for a draft. And yeah, so that was, I can see it. I've got blood all over now as a result of all these emotions that I went through to produce my keynote. But yeah, when we don't teach abstract thinking and abstract concepts to our pre-service teachers, then they go to schools and they generate the culture of students who can't think abstractly, and they produce words organized by grammar. And life becomes tiring for them, tiring for everybody, and they don't use language as a tool for empowerment. I'll create this website for you. I'll have podcasts, right? We'll have podcasts. And what we will have is us teachers every week will be pumping information about how the heck we were teaching, why we were doing things this way, what's happening here. We went to a conference, blah, blah, blah. Excited, right? No, they're intimidated by their lack of grammar. Oh my God, people will find out I can't speak English. And they don't know the secret. And the secret is that people who will switch onto their broadcast, they don't care about their grammar. They want to know what they think. They want to give them the time of their lives. But they are not taking it because they worry about their grammar. And the discipline is drowning. And we become more and more in Southeast Asia victims of our own framing. Oh my God, I don't have enough grammar. Andrew, you're nodding, you're whatever. This is the end of our broadcast now. I just want, Andrew and Lala, if you want to say some sentences towards the end, by all means, please, and we'll summarize it.
Well, I think I'm very glad if I can join the professional AsiaCALL professionalizing context. I think you are right, Anya. There is small space in the university and in the department in how we actually deal with technology and learning. So I think I and my team will be very happy to join lots of stuff with AsiaCALL in the future, and it will help us grow quickly, I guess. So thank you.
Andrew, any thoughts Final thoughts for today? Can't hear.
The final thought is that I'm very tired, and that's why I'm nodding and so on.
2 days of conferences.
Well, not just 2 days today, but also I've had other things to do, and a conference last week also, which was so it's been going on and on. I am astonished that after 40 years of modern computer-assisted language learning, there is very little penetration of what I would call high-level computer usage in the university, particularly in the university level. I don't know anything much about primary schools and secondary schools, but in the university level, we tend to use primitive technology, maybe because we can't afford the expensive one, I don't know, or maybe because all the new initiatives have gone, so we tend to use what is there already. So we use Microsoft Word, we use Excel, and then we use free things, free on the internet, TikTok, well, I don't know about TikTok, but a Kahoot, and stuff like that. And we like it because it's free. And we're into this free movement at the moment. And I get it. I understand completely, because if we were to pay $500, even in Western countries, $500 is a lot of money. If we were to pay $500 for access to something, it really wouldn't take us very much time to get rid of all our accumulated funds. So we're into free things. We do the best we can with what we've got. There are no major initiatives, as far as I can tell, like building multimedia, multinational databases that would be of use to people everywhere. There are things like generative call, where we could create our own lessons, or students could create their own lessons, something that I managed to prototype a long time ago, using Toolbook and no internet, quite happily. I mean, I prototyped it and I was able to create intonation lessons. Happens that I'm interested in intonation, so it was the simplest thing for me to do. Intonation lessons and dialogues. We could create dialogues very easily, dialogue generators. You could create materials generators. You could create your own lessons. You could create your own materials instead of running around trying to find, real interviews on real videos, on real whatever. You could create something which had the identical pragmatic and grammatical and discursive stuff on it by using artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence text generators. I mean, these things, and some of these things, by the way, are available now, and some of these things are free. So instead of trying to round up actors to act things out, or round up, go to Voice of America and ask for help, or go to TED Talks and ask for help with materials, which of course may not be exactly which may be better than what you could produce yourself using synthesizers. You can still do a lot of stuff that is useful using technology. And modern technology allows you to write some scripts by hand, or to type some scripts, then you put them into a text-to-speech machine, and you have a text that students can study. And in fact, if you want to reduce things like cheating, what we've called cheating in Thailand, because in Thailand they have developed some very ingenious ways of cheating. So, for example, I once was in a classroom where the students were taking pictures of the correct answers in the language lab on the screen of the computer, and then clicking and sending it to their friends who were in the room next door in the language lab, in the other language lab where they were doing the same exercise. So one of the ways of dealing with this is to randomize everything. So you randomize the exercises, and you can do this more easily by using speech to text machines, text to speech machines or text generators, which are currently available. You could even revolutionize the extended reading movement so that humans don't actually have to write books anymore. You can generate 20 books in 5 minutes using artificial intelligence. And I'm going to be looking at those things shortly. And so even if you have to pay money, like $50 a month, you can produce, 2,000 books a month, or the equivalent of 2,000 books a month for people to do extensive reading. And you might even be able to to develop templates for the books that you generate, which are automatically applied to the books. So we don't do that. We don't do any of that. What we do is we use computers for communication. We hope that people will talk more. We send stuff, to people overseas, and they write back to us, or we give them, whatever it is, exercises and so on. But the really exciting stuff other people do in their work when they try to sell stuff on the internet, right? So if they want to sell things on the internet, they will do all of the things that I talked about. But strangely enough, although there are many things that we do in real life, education is intact. It's amazing how resilient education is. It just stays with the things that it's been doing for the last 100 years. And I find this incredible. I mean, rhizomatic learning, I know it's a term that kind of frightens people some, but rhizomatic learning, which is, let's call it self-directed learning, real self-directed learning, where the student is entirely in charge of their own destiny, is what we do when our printer breaks down in real life. When our printer breaks down, we go to YouTube, find the answer, and fix it at home or experiment to personalize it to our own environment. And only if it doesn't work after that, we take it to the expert. Why can't we do that with education? Well, we can, but we don't, because education has to be regulated by ministries, teachers, and everybody else. Well,
However, coming
the
to
minister, I
this,
was going to say the ministers can regulate the databases to some extent if they wanted to, in the sense that they could help it. Anyway, go on.
if you yourself have a strong conceptual understanding of what you're doing, you can talk with ministers with their terminology, and you will win, and it's fine. But when we are always acting, with half of the brain only and don't have strong conceptual framing, then anyone can prove to us anything, and we cannot argue. And we also misunderstand policies. We misunderstand what policymakers are asking us to do, and then we blame policymakers. So anyway, we will finish for today. These were our reflections on what we did during the 2 days or 3 days of 4 days of conferencing recently, or at the end of November. And these are our little thoughts. Some decisions we made today that we will follow up in terms of strengthening the engagement of AsiaCALL throughout the region. I think that's very important. So that was a good talk. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming here. You heard some deep reflections, especially from Professor Lyon, who's been around, who's sitting around and who
Thank you.
actually understands the discipline of computer assisted language learning way more than most of us together.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. See you next week when we talk intellectual framing, and then we will have a break for Christmas for many reasons, and one of them is that nobody will switch on because people will be busy with presents, children, family, traveling, and so will I. Thank you so much. See you in a week.
Thank
One
you.
week? Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye.